When you think of high-strung and highbrow performance cars, who do you think of? Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini? There's a plethora of answers to this question, both traditional and otherwise. But, most likely, the average person wouldn't think of Honda in that category.
Honda as a brand has always had sporty elements to them. With their origins in internal engine work and motorcycles, it's astonishing to see the brand's meteoric rise to fame and introduction to the US market in 1959. They've created some damn amazing things over the years. But until the 90s, outside of motorcycles and Formula One, the average person most likely wouldn't have thought of Honda when someone talked about mid-engine sports cars.
That is until 1990, when out of nowhere, what is now a legend appeared in the company's extensive roster of products, the NSX. This was a pretty massive departure from the norm for Honda, so how it happened is quite a fascinating story.
In 1984, some Honda engineers experimented with changing from the front-engine front-wheel drive platform to UMR, underfloor, midship engine, rear-wheel drive, in an effort to improve packaging efficiency and vehicle dynamics. They also sent out a request to Pininfarina for a mid-engine Honda prototype known as the HPX, Honda Pininfarina Experimental. This project culminated in creating a mid-engine Honda City as a prototype, which proved successful but was shelved at the time due to cost.
Fast forward to 1985, and the company was hunting for a way to bridge their now successful F1 division and their standard road cars at the same time that Acura of America was in the planning stages. With several potential uses for a mid-engine car now, the project was dusted off, sent to engineering, and what is now known as the NSX, New Sports Car Experimental, came to life.
To get the basic idea of what they were after, they plotted a data sheet with their competitor's wheelbase versus power output, and then compared them to a Formula One car, finding out what they believed to be the perfect cross-section for a road car, and began experimenting with materials. Using a CRX body, they landed on aluminum for its weight reduction capabilities, which led to the NSX becoming the first production car with an aluminum monocoque. Adding some inspiration from an F-16 fighter jet cockpit and titanium connecting rods, it resulted in yet another first for the car and an 8,000 RPM redline.
After several years of development and engineering, they ended up with Prototype 2, which was a test mule close to the final product and was used to conduct testing at Suzuka Circuit. By pure happenstance, Ayrton Senna was on location as well for Formula One testing, and was asked to drive the NSX for some thoughts. His response was, and I quote, "I'm not sure I can really give you appropriate advice on a mass production car, but I feel it's a little fragile."
The team took his words as the gospel and set up shop at the Nürburgring for 8 months to improve the car's overall dynamics, becoming the first Japanese automotive team to conduct long-term overseas testing. The team on site tested and toiled, changing things on the spot to improve the car's rigidity and overall handling, ending up with a 50% increase in chassis rigidity, which, as engineering goes, is nothing short of a miracle.
With the half-decade-long development done, the finished product was unveiled at the Chicago Auto Show in February of 1989 to the masses, with test drives launched in Japan, the US, and West Germany near the Nürburgring to show prospective clients what the company had created. With a 3-year backlog on pre-orders and its own plant with dedicated technicians and facilities, the NSX launched in the 1990 model year to the world and has since been regarded as legendary.
Now, the man at the helm of the project was Shigeru Uehara, and if you don't know who he is, you should definitely look up his fascinating story as a large project leader for Honda all the way up until the S2000. He put it pretty well when he was asked what truly defines a car, and he responded with, "A car is a machine that functions through a direct link with a driver and passenger. The quality of that car is determined by whether or not the car can kindle excitement in the person who drives it." So the big question is, were they able to achieve that? Well, and that's what we're here to find out.
Yeah, right here, you can see we have a trio of NSX.
We drove all of them.
And to be honest, there's some crazy shit here. So I drove this black 92 NA1 NSX with manual steering, and yeah, I got some shit to say. Let's find out. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everything in between. Here I sit, about ready to kind of ruin a lot of things for me. Those that know me know that I'm really generally drawn more towards German cars. However, my first car was actually a Mazda MX-6, but I haven't had hardly any experience with anything sporty Japanese. I've driven a Miata a grand total of once, literally in a straight line for less than a few miles, nothing special. I haven't driven any GTRs, I've only ridden in them. So I really haven't had hardly any experiences with the crazy side of the Asian market. I own a Stinger, but again, that's even more of a German-inspired Asian vehicle. This is a halo car, AKA a 92 Acura NSX. And I'm about to ruin most other Japanese things today by driving it. I ruin them for me, of course. It's not gonna ruin anything for anybody else, but let's see what this feels like. The ability to kiss 8,000 RPM. See, this is what I'd call perplexing. It's so easy to heel toe like that, even though I really haven't driven this car that much. I can see why people would call this boring. The car is boring because it is so good at doing whatever you task it with. It doesn't complain. It's not terribly dramatic. It does pretty much exactly what you want it to, exactly where you point it, and exactly what you'd expect. There's not much like drama or theater to it beyond the VTEC trumpeting behind me with that lovely V6. I'm kind of smitten by it, I've got to admit. I didn't know what to expect. I was hoping that it was as good as it is, and I'm glad to report that I think it is. It brakes well, steering is amazing, especially because this being a 92, this is manual steering. This is not a power steering car. Let me just kind of give some demonstration of how just amazing that is. Just turn in, you feel every single bit of what's going on with the wheels. So even if you go in a little out of line, you can make a correction carefully because it's telling you exactly what's going on and never have a problem. It's just astounding. You can definitely tell, like, you spent so much time developing this, and I mean, they were shooting for F1 status, right? They were trying to make an F1 car for the road. Obviously, they had to make it comfortable, which they did, but they didn't ruin the experience. I mean, just like these little S's right here, just stringing together so easily. And I'm driving at, probably a pretty good pace, like 7/10-ish, but I'm not tired doing it because the car is planted, eager to do more. It is relatively flat without being harsh. Has a balance of compliance and stiffness that's just intoxicating. You're actively watching someone fall in love. I know that that's a cliche. It's been overplayed in the car world so much. It really is. But genuinely, I'm finding a love for something that I didn't have before. I mean, the fact that you can sit in here, do what I just did, and slow it down, like what I did right now, and leisurely cruise up this canyon, and the car's perfectly happy to do both. That's rare. Usually, if a car's perfectly happy to do both those things, it's some type of a GT cruiser. Usually something like the RS5 that we drove in the 4.2 film. That's, a car that is extremely comfortable to drive in and all that kind of stuff, but it is nowhere near as nimble as this car. The fact that this car can do what it does in the corners and then take a leisurely Sunday drive like I've slowed down to right now shows that there was an extraordinary amount of thought put into both the daily usability and the canyon driving of this thing. And again, I need to emphasize one final time, that is astonishingly rare. Usually cars are pretty Jekyll and Hyde with their purposes. There's a lot of gray area in between, but if you take something like, most any Ferrari, they're going to be shooting for some pizzazz. Lamborghini is the crazy one. This, to be quite frank, is a driver. This is the person that buys a car for the purpose of doing any type of driving task and enjoying every single one of those things. You could go cross country. Let's say I left Utah, go to all the way out to the Appalachians and go to Tail of the Dragon. Go all the way through the mountains of Tennessee, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Do all of those things, and then just cruise on the Grand Canyon when you're back the other direction, and the car will say, okay, I am so happy to do anything with you. It's like a faithful dog. Don't get me wrong, I love it when a car tries to throw your hair back and kill you. Hell, one of my dream cars is a Roscion Q1 that actively would want to kill me if I owned it. But the fact that this can do so much of what that Roscion can, and then effectively turn into a daily driver Accord in an instant, is just the mixed drink cocktail of all hell. And I'm glad that I've gotten to do a mixed amount of driving in this. I have pushed this thing very hard as far as like on this road and what this road is capable of. And the car didn't complain once. And I know the car didn't feel like it didn't like to do it. It loved to do it. And then we've had to cruise back and forth. We had to commute over an hour to get here. And while the car was ferried by Gavin in that instance, being that I've driven down the other side of this canyon, I already know that that was a perfectly comfortable drive. Everything just worked. I mean, think about it. This car has a trunk that's actually usable. This car is easily serviceable, even from your own garage, compared to any other mid-engine car. Honda knocked it out of the park in a car in a segment that they had never once built a vehicle in. This is a perfect example of what happens when you have purpose. You strive to create that purpose, do it to the best of your abilities, to some degrees regardless of cost, and you have a passionate team behind you. They had an extremely famous F1 driver drive it once while they just both happened to be doing effectively test and tune at Suzuka. And he made a comment that the car felt a little fragile, mainly that it wasn't very rigid. And they took that to heart and spent damn near another year at the Nürburgring tuning this thing and got a 50% chassis rigidity improvement. That's cataclysmic. That's monumental. It's huge. Numbers like that don't just appear out of thin air. Numbers like that appear out of people who wanted this thing to write a new chapter for Honda and a major page in the history book. And I mean, I can only say, hand on heart, they fucking did it. And being a German car enthusiast at heart, I understand better now from driving this why everyone loves Japanese cars. Because I just hadn't had the opportunity. And now that I have, I definitely want more. I want to experience more of the world. In fact, honestly, I feel like I could see myself actually purchasing one of these. I'm in the middle of probably the next year or two wanting to look for like a good daily. I could see myself buying one of these. Granted, they're expensive now, just like everything has gotten, but if I bought a driver one of these, one with over 100,000 miles, a little tattered on the exterior, but well taken care of mechanically, oh, I could imagine nothing better than throwing a set of studded snow tires on this and using it as a commuter, because it's so good. And it would love it too. And I think that really explains more about this car than anything else. You could do all of the above with it. Honda really did create a car that you could live with for the rest of your lives. In fact, there might be some of you that have seen a certain article that made the rounds of an individual that did put several 100,000 miles on one of these as a daily driver. I could see why. Some people would call that crazy, especially with the values of these things now. I call that, when that car eventually dies, that car lived its best life. Absolutely. It did everything it loved to do, and it loved to do everything. And I definitely want a little bit more.
All right, so Justin is in what's called an NA1. People that don't know might think that the NA2 is the fixed headlight car. Oh, no, no, no. NA2 started with this. This is a 1997 NSX. So they call this the NA2, and that's because it's a 3.2 liter. So it's a 200cc displacement over the NA1, which is the first generation. This car comes with the introduction of electric power steering, and having driven both versions of the car, boy, is this a night and day difference. This is really like driving, I don't know, a Lexus LS400 or a Camry, or, you know, pick your Japanese car, any kind of car from the 90s. You still feel some communication through the front. The chassis itself is still quite communicative, but it's nothing like what the car that Justin is driving right now. So this car, provided by our good friend Gardner, he bought this car about 5 years ago, and in doing so has made some modifications to it. Has intake, has headers, has coilovers, has some wheels with some tires, 10 millimeter wider in the front than stock, and like a 30 millimeter wider rear than stock. The car drives pretty well. Over this road in particular is a little jittery, but I mean, I'm still having a blast. These cars are geared super tall too. Second gear takes you to like 70. Like, I'm still in second. And now I start to understand why people complain about GT4s, because this is almost as bad. Oh, what an amazing day we're having here. Oh my God. What a day to be having here.
Well, hello there.
Hello!
How are you?
Funny seeing you here.
I know. So I was just reviewing this car.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny, because I was actually giving you a review of this car, which is the better version of that.
Theoretically. Theoretically.
You would think.
You want to go on a drive?
Let's go for a drive.
We have walkies. We can do this. Oh, maybe he has it. We got communication, boys. Let's go for a drive.
So, that was your first NSX.
Man.
Vomit on me.
'Kay.
Give me your thoughts.
You can clearly tell I might have gotten a little bit emotional in the middle of there.
A little excited.
When you're so used to driving vehicles that are modern, you forget how much, we'll call it data for lack of a better term, is lost that's transmitting to you as you're driving it. You forget that, like, okay, dual clutches are fantastic and arguably better in every way than a manual, but you don't have any type of direct connection to it.
Right, and I can say for myself, and I think for you as well, in our automotive adolescence, because of just the lack of access we have when we're like either younger or not as involved with cars, we're only kind of exposed to so much, really. And those things tend to be newer cars. Things like, you know, more modern Porsches, possibly Volkswagen products in general, whether it be, you know, Volkswagens or Audis with DSG, things like that. And the more that you and I drive, and the access to older cars and more interesting and more evolving cars we get, the more we're starting to kind of learn about really more proper engaging cars. Like, sure, the Lotus Elise exists and has existed for some time, and that's a real masterclass of, you know, raw, involving, really immersive driving.
Yeah, and so you forget like things like the gearbox. You forget things like even manual steering versus power steering.
You're right.
And ironically, Gavin will circle back around to that with the yellow car a little bit later. That got a little interesting too, as we had two power steering cars.
Yes. Three, technically.
Three technically, the blue one. Sorry, baby, I didn't mean to forget you. And that combined with you know, all the stuff we talked about in the intro, like the insane attention to detail on things like the suspension and stiffening of the chassis and the months spent at the Nürburgring, I could feel that. You can feel when, like, clearly not just like the engineers, but also the designers, the team on the ground, and the mechanics. You can tell that, like, everybody was invested in the project to make sure that this thing was just about as damn good as it could get. Probably even to some degree, money be damned.
Right.
Because I can guarantee there was so much money expended.
Well, and it doesn't happen all the time. There are cars where you definitely feel this, but it's I almost want to say once in a generation, where you really feel when you're driving the car that the people that were behind it, whether it was the designers, development team and R&D, everybody involved from the sketch to final sale, that they really cared about this car.
Yeah, I mean, even things like pedal placement is such an easy thing to mess up.
It's so good in these cars. And we'll get into that later.
Yeah, and like the throttle pedal is on this car on cable. On the later cars, the red and yellow cars, it is electronic. Fortunately, they didn't screw that up. I'll actually give them that right now. They really didn't screw up the pedal feel, but again,
we'll circle back to that later.
There's just a lot of differences I'm trying to outline between even the older cars. Obviously, pop-up versus like not pop-up. The pop-ups are really cool.
They're rad.
Oh, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And all those things combined into one package just brought me to a point where I'm like, I could see myself dailying this. I could see myself owning one even at to some degree, even at their inflated prices.
They've definitely become inflated, for sure. I mean, that car used to be 15 years ago. It was a $25,000 car.
Yeah.
At today's market value, given its current condition, probably 60.
Yeah. And that has the lowest mileage of the bunch. That has 38,000 miles. And it's original paint. It has a 6-speed swap, and it has a clutch, and it has an exhaust.
And there's a reason for the 6-speed swap. A lot of these cars actually were, their gearboxes are rather fragile in the 5 speeds. And I would like to actually try to find a 5-speed and just see how the ratios are like in these cars, or in those cars. The ratios in the manual cars here actually have really tall gearing, for considering they're 6 speeds. Top speed in first is like 35 or 40. Second is like 75.
It's pretty up there. So like you can basically, if you're in a canyon, you're sitting in second gear at 40 at like 3,500 RPM, you still got half your rev range.
And most of the times you're in, especially a really narrow, winding road, you're in second.
Yeah.
You will get an opportunity for third, probably, but it's not guaranteed.
Yeah, you need more of a straight for that, for sure. And I'm glad that this car lived up to all my expectations. I had heard a couple people mention, it's not the most exciting car. Yeah, and I brought that up in my review. It's not necessarily, but that's to me what makes it so great is it doesn't throw itself out of line. It's so good at like towing the line of, I'm gonna do exactly what I'm gonna wanna do and show you what will make you better and teach you versus, oh, I'm just gonna cut your head off, or, oh, I have no feeling, I don't know what's going on. It's a perfect middle ground. It's not
the Rawson Q1 where it wants to bite your head off and kill you. Video coming sometime in the future, we'll see.
Yes.
And it's not an R35 GTR where it's like, oh no, let me take care of that for you.
Exactly. Like you learn along with the car. Like I said, and it's like a faithful dog.
The car has one setting. It's not like it's a dynamic suspension or varying amount of traction control or torque vectoring.
Or throttle, like that's very common in modern sport modes, like throttle mapping. All of a sudden you go, in fact, this car in particular, and almost every modern car, you go into sport mode and all of a sudden the throttle's twice as sensitive.
Or if you put it into a cold weather mode and it dumbs down the throttle.
And brakes and all that stuff. Again, it was a return to basics of just forgetting how much all this cool technology, arguably fantastic technology, might have taken away a little bit from the experience. Because that experience honestly meant more to me than probably most of my other experiences in recent memory.
Wow.
When I can honestly, being a pretty like middle grounded person, imagine owning one thing or another fairly easily. I try to like get into the mind of the person that would buy it. However, when something really strikes me, I kind of like put it in a list of like one day if I find the right opportunity. And this car made that list for sure. You don't compromise on luggage space hardly at all. You can still fit 2 sets of golf clubs in there. You don't compromise as much on maintenance as you would with any other mid-engine car. You can go over bumps and everything.
Right. This is kind of anecdotal. I haven't looked into numbers of this. It's as easy or as cheap to maintain as a Corvette kind of is, where sure, the engine is not difficult to find parts for, but there are a lot of bespoke NSX parts about the car, or like a Lotus Elise. Like sure, the Toyota motor in it it's out of a matrix or whatever, but there's so many things surrounding that engine that are bespoke to that car. So
like the body
or suspension control, like things like control arms, frame, like so many things that are surrounding the engine.
So I left that whole experience honestly feeling like the hero had actually lived up to the legend.
That's awesome.
Sincerely. You know, you always, you know, the phrase "don't meet your heroes" has a lot of weight for good reason, because there's a lot of times, especially when we're reviewing them 30 years later, that they do not live up. Because to be fair, there are many 4-cylinders in normal cars that have just as much, if not more, power than that.
With turbos.
Yep, with turbos.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's technology. We've moved on. This was the technology of the time, and at the time, it was moderately groundbreaking.
GTIs are more powerful than that.
They don't rev up to 8,000 though.
They don't sound like, well, if you do, you have problems.
They can. Bottom end go boom. But pretty much everything about the car to me felt so cohesive that I absolutely loved it. And I could honestly go on about that forever. They just genuinely, I have to say, they spent so much time tweaking every single thing that they made a fantastic car with manual steering that wasn't overbearing, with pedals that were relatively perfect, with a 6-speed that I can't imagine much else feeling better to shift. And
Yeah, it's up there.
everything works. Yeah. Everything goes. It's a Honda at the end of the day, despite the fact here it's an Acura, but everywhere else it's a Honda. So after I had that experience and we did all our shooting and whatnot, I was left pretty like smitten and really excited about that car, and me and Gavin got to drive the black and red cars back to back for just a moment and have a little fun driving down together. And so you probably have a couple notes on that red car to transition into your yellow car, because there's a couple differences.
Well, so the red car was the introduction of power steering, and it was the introduction of throttle by wire, and it was the introduction of the 3.2 motor. The great thing that I really did enjoy about the yellow and red car is that, unlike the S2000, when you gained that extra 200 cc's, you didn't lose anything on the top end, like as far as revs are concerned. Yeah, it's a bigger motor, but you still get to rev all the way out. It's still just as smooth. There wasn't ever like a really, like there wasn't a thunderous, you know, kick in of VTEC. Really,
Yeah.
they were all the cars are fairly smooth. The red car definitely. Trying to think of how to put this tactfully. I was the only person to actually drive that car on shoot day. So I'm the one that actually has to really carry the message to the rest of you. You could definitely tell that thing was electric power steering. It definitely felt like, you know, think of a Camry or a Lexus LS400 from back in the day. Not like that there was slop in the steering, but just crazy amounts of just assistance. And it felt like, okay, this is like a fine cruising vehicle, a great car to take to Cars and Coffee. I'm not going to want to hit the canyons and definitely not taking it to a track, but it was still.
And to be clear, this car's a 97, so it's target top, larger 3.2 engine, so not the slow years 95 and 96.
Right.
But all the same.
I mean, I'm not quite sure how much else to really add after that.
Well, really, I mainly wanted you to make those points because there might be a few differences between that and the later car.
Yeah, the yellow car made me want to cry. And this is coming from someone who's not like a hardcore, like diehard JDM guy. I had a black NA1 NSX as a remote control car when I was like a little kid. And that left an impression on me, but it wasn't like a fixed headlight car. So I never really dreamt about that car until I drove it.
Yeah, you got to see this.
This is coming from the Porsche guy. This is coming from the guy that's like, oh, have you heard about the GT3? Have you heard about, 964s?
When something makes you rethink life, I think we need to look at what exactly you thought.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Full disclosure, I came into this review with kind of low expectations. I thought because, well, the older car is gonna probably be more raw and pop-ups, everyone loves a good pop-up, and this is gonna probably be the heavier and more refined version of that original recipe that
you know, it was just going to be kind of a watered down version of the NSX brand. And I am extraordinarily happy to report that is not the case. Okay, so let's take what was previously the 3-liter and punch it out to 3.2 liters. I did already drive the older version of that car, okay? This version is a 3.2 still, but it makes 290 horsepower. And although the engine is punched out that extra 200 cc's, it still pulls to 8,000 RPM. That's not in the S2000 when they jumped 200 cc's. They did some real witchcraft here. And that red car that you just saw me drive had electric power steering. So does this. They didn't take it away. And on paper, you would think, oh, well, I really should just stay to, like, you know, the 92s and the 90s and, like, the older stuff. Well, let me tell you, this version of the car, with the extra power, you still have your 6 speeds, and yes, you have e-throttle, and yes, you have e-pass. However, this version of the car is one without compromise. You still get so much information about forces on the front wheels and what's happening and where things are tugging. You're still giving information. This does not drive like the last car, where it feels like a mid-90s Corolla or Camry. So I'm so drunk on that. Pedals are perfectly placed for heel toe still. That hasn't changed a bit. I love cars that communicate with me. I also love cars that can do both ends of the spectrum. They like to drive slow. They also like to drive fast. They respond. They do what you tell them to do. They tell you what's going on. That's why I love my Fiesta. I know we haven't done a video on that yet, and I'm sorry. I love cars like that. I also do love that RS5 that is able to be kind of hair on fire sometimes and is super planted and can carry a lot of speed. But I also love cars that talk to you, and that Audi doesn't do that. I mean, hell, the 992 Carrera that we drove last year doesn't really talk to you. The rear end does a little wiggle, but that's because the engine's all the way back there. This car with electric power steering still talks to you. I don't know how that works or how that happens, being a product of the early 2000s. This gearbox is super notchy still, and the more I'm driving this car, the more I'm realizing the extent of the modifications that were actually on our black NA1. Because that car had an aftermarket 6-speed manual swap. Those cars are supposed to be 5 speeds. 5 speeds are not super reliable in those cars. People have been known to swap them. The interesting comparison about this versus the older cars is this has an e-throttle. It's throttle by wire. And the feel of the actual throttle doesn't really feel any different. It's just, if you're in a low gear, if you just, stomp on it, there's an ever slight delay. It's not like modern Volkswagens. It's not like a lot of other modern cars. It actually cuts those delays about in half or maybe a third. But everything about this car is super linear, progressive, and communicative. It's just rather easy. I mean, I'm modulating some throttle off rotation, and I know what the wheels are doing, and it's still e-pass, it's e-steering. I'm losing my words because fuck me, I want this. I'm getting carried away, I know I am. But god damn it, do I want to just spend $110,000 right now. Bradley, you are costing me money, sir. And I'm actually kind of okay with it. We also paired up this road properly with this car. I'm so glad we're here. I had the air conditioning off for audio purposes, but this with the top off and some AC on and a lovely like 80, 85 degree day. Some things I don't necessarily like. The catch point of this car in particular is quite high up and is a little more vague than the black car. I've spent a lot of time in that black car since shooting this film. I wish it had that clutch, this shifter. This is the Franken NSX that we're talking about here. This motor, black car clutch, yellow car shifter, yellow car targa, black car exhaust. That car actually had a lovely exhaust note to it, and actually on the outside of the car, you hardly hear the exhaust. It's really mostly intake, and it's really mostly intake from the inside of the cabin. When we were filming Justin's in-car review just a few moments ago, plot twist, I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I've been someone to appreciate Japanese cars just a little bit more than Justin. Not to say that he's a hater, don't call him a hater, that just hasn't been his world. I idolized this car when I was growing up as a little kid, and I actually had a black NA1 NSX RC car. And I used to drive that around the hardwood in my parents' house, and would even go into the garage and make little videos about it doing burnouts. That was such a core part of my upbringing that made me a car guy. It was that, it was going on golf trips with my dad in his 964, and it was reading Car and Driver. That was most of my childhood. And I've driven an NSX before this whole production. Not even that black one, but a different black one from my buddy Omar. But I didn't quite connect with it as much, nearly as much, as I am now. And going back to when Justin gave his in-car and said that he was smitten, I had the biggest shit-eating grin on my face. And giving my review of this now and having driven this car all day, fuck, dude. I want it. I want one. I've been a fan of air-cooled 911s for a long, long time, and I've liked these NSXs, and I've loved old Ferraris. But I think I found the new dream. I agree. I think I found the new dream. Back to the studio.
So I think you had a good time. I think if I had to summarize it, you loved it.
Yeah. When the reason that you get into cars is, you know, when that comes from one car or one experience from one car, whether it's in person, whether it's, you know, a poster on your wall or whatever, and that becomes so much about your, I don't want to even, maybe, I guess your identity.
Yeah.
Becomes so much of like what you like work for and strive for. I mean, it took me almost 15 years to find, you know, the same generation of car my dad had growing up, which is the car that got me into cars. Mm-hmm. When so much of that is like embedded in you, and then you find a different experience to kind of set that, you know, to, I'm trying to think of like a good word for like loosen a foundation. It loosened the foundation of Porsche in my life. I'm not saying that I'm not going to buy a Porsche. I'm not saying that I'm not going to buy an NSX.
A new contender has entered the stage.
Right. I can't remember. I might have actually said this in the review, but if I didn't, a few years ago, I drove a 981 generation Cayman S with TDK and a Sport Chrono, and I had that for a few days, rental on Turo, and that car made me want to work harder in life because I knew that that's something that I needed. I had that again with the RS5, but I feel like that's faded. That felt a little more forced. I drove this car again today down from Highland, Utah, up here to downtown Salt Lake City, and it just like happened again.
I was like, oh yeah, no, this is exactly what I want.
The feelings were all back.
Yeah, nothing changed, nothing faded. Like, sure, it's been a few weeks since I had driven the car. It hadn't been that much time, but I understood, like, oh yeah, no, this is still really good, and I think I might need this still. The thing about this yellow car, the NA2 NSX, it is the 3.2, it is a 6-speed, and it is the electric power steering, but I think one of the great things about the car was that it also had the best tires of the bunch. I think with the exception of this, because it's a brand new Type S, hasn't had different tires. This is factory tires.
Yep.
200 tread wear tires makes a lot of difference.
It does.
The yellow car is the highest miles car by a long shot. It's over 80,000 miles. And it also has a Type S sway bar that's period correct. That came with the car. Not came with the car, but aftermarket Type S from back in the day.
Yep.
That mixed with just how responsive the throttle still is with it being e-throttle. For some reason, I don't know if it's because of the tires. I don't know if it's because of they had a little bit more time to fiddle with the power steering or anything like that. But the fact that it is still electric and it still communicates, it still talks to me, it feels like a really good hydraulic rack.
I agree.
It blows my mind.
Yeah, like he said earlier, I didn't drive the red car, so I sadly can't give context, but I can give
not great. It's not great.
I can give context that, like, that doesn't feel really worse than that. And that's astonishing.
It doesn't feel worse. It just feels easier to drive at lower speeds. Even when I was, there's an S curve that, the highway that comes here that drops us into downtown from the south, there's an S curve that drops us in. And I took that S curve at a good pace today, and it felt like that car.
Yeah, it really does. In fact, I have a theory here that may or may not be correct, so please take it with a grain of salt, that they basically took the rack from that and made a way to mount an electric motor to it, because they do feel so similar that I can't imagine the racks themselves are that different. So, because the assistance in that isn't even that much.
And who knows
just
what
enough.
the boosting or the boosting of the electric motor for the assist, or what the bushings are like in between the two cars.
Yeah.
You know, you have to really tear these cars down and like see for yourself. I sure would like to.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, like, this car, even though it's the highest mileage, has probably also been the most driven and the most maintained. And it's not throwing shade at a different owner. It's just simply said that, like, since this has been driven more things have probably either been replaced,
Right.
or been upgraded, aka like, okay, a bushing's a little loose, just throw a new one in, type of dealio. Whereas this one's much more original.
It is more original. The owner of this car has only had his. We drove that car a year ago.
Yeah.
It was just over a year ago. He probably got a couple months before that.
Yeah.
So this was a bring a trailer car.
Yeah.
So who knows what the previous owner or owners, were like before that. But yeah, it's one of the lowest miles cars that we have here. But the thing about this owner too is every time we've had to ask for this car to be on camera, he's like, "Oh yeah, take it. These cars are meant to be driven. They're meant to be driven.
Please.
They're meant to be driven.
Yeah.
Yeah, please have at it." It's like, "Oh, okay, I'll just take it again."
And that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that car's getting love. All these cars have been getting love. When we drove this car for the first time that you're about to see, we picked it up with 340 miles.
Yes.
And then we continued to, no, it was 600 miles.
It was
Just
600.
kidding.
Yeah.
It was 640 miles and we put 300 miles on it.
Yep.
Since then, in the whatever month or so it's been since we drove that car, the owner has put 2,200 miles?
2,600.
2,600 miles on it.
So he's put an additional almost 2,000 on it.
Drive your cars, people.
Fantastic.
They're meant to be driven. And it's a collector car. It's the rarest car we have here. It's one of the rarest cars we've ever driven.
And before we get into that, I personally want to tidy up one or two last things.
With the yellow car?
With the yellow car.
Okay.
I don't hate fixed headlights. I know a lot of people are pretty polarized on like fixed versus pop-up because that's so iconic. Those look good. That's fixed headlights done right when you have to do a transition. Really. Genuinely, it doesn't look out of place on that car.
Have you seen the aftermarket C5 Corvette fixed headlights?
That was kind of my point.
Right.
Is that like that never happened from the manufacturer, but the aftermarket solutions are so horrid that like this to this from the manufacturer, kudos. Whoever designed those lights for that car, to move from a pop-up system without doing a massive full front-end redesign, kudos.
I mean, that's the thing about the NSX. From that car to that car to, spoiler alert, that car, they really thought about it. And as, you know, maybe as a transition into blue car, this had some shoes to fill.
We know, as a quick recursor, this generation came out in 2016 to decent fanfare, somewhat, but depending on who you looked at, it was a pretty polarizing car. This is a 2022 Type S.
Right. So little bump in power, suspension tweaks here and there.
Carbon.
Front fascia.
Yeah, major front fascia, carbon everywhere, so carbon ceramic brakes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Yeah, those were really good brakes.
They stop very well.
They work.
Big shoes to fill. Let's see how it did. Okay.
Jesus Christ!
Hoo-hoo.
So there is a particular song that I actually have in mind that might spring to mind.
Oh.
You might actually know it. And you all actually might know it.
Huh.
Birds flying high.
Oh, God.
You know how I feel.
Please make it stop.
Sun in the sky.
No.
You know how I feel.
No.
Breeze. Something on by. You know how I feel.
Ladies and gentlemen, save me from this madness.
It's a new dawn. It's a new day.
Are you feeling good?
And I'm feeling good.
Bow down.
Bow down. Okay, anyway, here we are in the NC1 generation Acura NSX Type S. Okay, so as a presenter, as someone who wrangles cars, as a shooter, and as someone who is driving this thing, I feel a massive weight on my shoulders.
This is rare, very new.
They made 350 of them. I don't know if they're all spoken for, but people have been flipping them for north of $300,000.
And this one doesn't even have 1,000 miles on it yet.
It has 708 miles on it. So, to the owner,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't think that we could have actually have done this. Like, in my craziest of crack pipe dreams, could not have thought that we could have wrangled an NSX Type S.
We heard rumors that one existed in Utah, and by sheer luck,
I first knew about the car actually because of just friends I know and seeing the car on Instagram, going like, oh, we have one of those now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
But okay, enough said about this car and how we got it. We're super grateful and incredibly fortunate to have had it. But hear me out. The old cars, back especially when the NA1 came out, that was a car that pushed the ball forward for sports cars of the era. Acura and Honda went after Ferrari. And we've said that a few times in this video.
Big moves.
Big moves. I mean, that's honestly a big call to make. So you might be wondering why I was singing Nina Simone. Well, those cars, I feel like, represent her iteration of the song Feeling Good.
Okay.
This car is Michael Bublé. Okay, so hear me out here. Those were more, the older cars were more raw, they were more crisp at the same time. There was a purity to them. They weren't the most pure and simple and straightforward thing in your face. It's not a Lotus Elise, it's not a Caterham, it's not an Ariel Atom.
No.
But they were still essential and pure in their delivery, in their communication that they spoke to you about, whether it's steering feel, brake feel, chassis dynamics, what's happening in the chassis.
Pedal placement.
Pedal placement. Oh my God, pedal placement. This car does so much for you. It's the Christmas song, that Michael Bublé plays every year. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because people will see this car and be ultimately impressed by the stats, the things it can do, how incredibly easily you can do felony numbers.
Ludicrous speeds.
Felony numbers on canyon roads. Not to say that I've done so.
No. Maybe flip it back into Sport Plus so you have traction.
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm okay.
Just want to make sure.
So when the NC1 came out in 2016, it was met with some critical acclaim.
Yeah.
There were people that drove the early, you could call it a prototype car, it's a pre-production model, and there were notes there. This still has electric power steering like that NA2 that I just drove. However, it's an electric power steering system that, started in 2016, not in 2001.
I have a suspicion that the older steering rack is just effectively a manual rack with basically an electric motor strapped to it, because that's what it felt like.
And I'm actually taking it a little easy. This is actually me feeling the car out.
Yeah. Woo!
This car is doing so much for me right now. Okay, after that one pass, what can I say? You can feel how heavy this thing actually is. Curb weight is 3,800 pounds.
That's a gain of 700, I believe.
Whatever it is, I mean, let's make a different comparison here.
Yeah.
That's an entry-level Stinger GT. And we've driven some cars before, like the M2. It's a short wheelbase, two-door sports coupe, which weighs 3,600 pounds. And that rotated well, and there are cars that can rotate well that you still feel the weight, despite it having a really quick and assisted electric steering rack. It doesn't feel as chuckable as that yellow NA2 car that I just got done driving. You feel a weight, and you can feel poise. You can feel that the weight is going on one side of the car, but it doesn't have any sort of drama about it. It just does the thing. The NA1 NSX did this in the early 90s. And then the R8 did it in the mid-2000s. It's just another iteration of sports cars. Ooh, except if you do goose on it, in the mid-corner, it will shove. Yeah. So there's that. It's just easy. Everything about this car is easy mode. Even on the track mode that I actually have on right now.
In fact, even the owner said that he was confident in the car's abilities, and
that's how he gave us a car that was so new with so few miles on it. And he had trust that, the car's gonna be fine.
The car can handle itself.
Yeah, there's nothing that I'm gonna do to unstick this thing. And this is a car where you don't feel like you're doing such a crazy thing in the moment. You're just kind of focused on accomplishing the task, where the other older cars are more in the moment, and there's a celebration when you're in that moment. When you're in the moment with the NC1, you're just going. You're just focused on the task. Pull paddle, pull paddle, pull paddle, triple digits. Yeah. Well, what do you have to say?
Side seat, what's interesting is you always get a different perspective side saddle than you do driving, for many reasons. Because I can feel more than an inertia, and he's focused obviously on controlling the thing. Yeah. So I can feel, between the electric motors and all the electronic trickery going on, the car shimmying power ever so slightly. But doing a very good job of it. I'm gonna bet in that seat, it's not quite as prevalent as it is over here.
It's not, it actually isn't.
And so they did a damn good job, I think, of balancing that, because it's just slight. Different cars will have different things, but we'll have some fun. Jesus.
Easy.
Like that.
Easy.
Also, I do have to also comment one last thing from side saddle. It is shockingly quiet in here from road noise.
The NVH levels, it's a church in here.
especially compared to the other two cars. They clearly were
I
on the
should
way.
have brought a book with me, actually, to have you read.
I know, right? They clearly were on a weight-saving mission with the other cars. That's part of their allure, was mid-engine, relatively lightweight for what it is, V6, fantastic, chuckable manual vehicle. Whereas this, like, you could definitely tell they knew they weren't going to save a ton of weight, but they also knew to compete with the people they were going against. In this era, it needed to be quiet and comfortable and refined.
Wow. It hugs. So right now I'm in Sport Plus, and it actually uses the front electric motors to pull in and shove torque. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. The one thing I'm really impressed about with this car is how fluid and how integrated the electricity is, and how the electrification is integrated. There isn't a gap of power, really. Like, after 3,000, there's a little bit of turbo lag, but after 3,000, it's on, and you better hold on. Well, the thing that we liked about the other cars was how well they can perform at both ends of the spectrum, right?
Yep.
How they can be not hair on fire, but really involved and engaged and thrilling when you're pushing it, or at least pushing yourself. And that doesn't end here. That still exists here, even with it being a Type S. Watch, I will put it into an actual quiet mode. The baffles have closed, or just out for a drive.
A lovely drive. It's as quiet in here as it is in most modern, like, entry-level luxury cars.
Yeah, straight up.
It really is.
There's a little... If you put your ear up here, you can actually hear the induction to the turbo.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a byline in between the cars that we've shown on camera. They might look and feel and drive completely differently, but there is a byline of, with their introduction, paving the way for the next chapter of sports cars. The 918 did technically come out first, and this is kind of a budget 918 with the way the hybridness is set up. You know, it's a V6 instead of a V8, and it makes 600 horsepower and not, almost 1,000.
Yeah.
So it is a different beast there, but it's a dual clutch, hybrid technology, and new. These were like, what, 180? Some of them are, some people are flipping these for, I've seen 300 and I think 395 was the other one for the Type S specifically.
Yeah, it's just insane.
I mean, the market's crazy right now. Don't buy them at that. I think for 180, if you're getting one for roughly sticker, 180 to 200, you are getting a quite unique experience here. I can't imagine Huracans are this comfortable. The seating position on this is sublime.
It is lovely. These seats are lovely. They have an amazing amount of cush for being as thin as
They have cush, but they also have lumbar adjustment. You can adjust the back on them.
Yep.
I could totally, like in the older cars, put on cruise control and road trip this to California and go hit up Willow Springs and run a track day and then drive home.
Yeah.
I feel completely safe in doing that. Okay, well, we had some GoPro issues that we normally do, but we're kind of leaning into this moment right now. I've been kind of selfish about stealing time for driving this car. But before I depart the driver's seat, thank you, Kyle. This for us is huge, and I understand that with you wanted to help other content creators. But holy shit, dude, this is a big one. This is the fastest car we've driven on the channel, numbers wise. This is one of the rarest cars we've ever driven, period, let alone do a video on. This is the most expensive car we've ever driven. So this is big. And we definitely want to let both you, the owner, know, you, the viewer, know that we do not take this lightly. And we appreciate the hell out of anyone that lends us a car to begin with, let alone a car of this caliber. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Agreed.
Let's switch seats, shall we?
You're about to see my first impressions. I have not piloted this beast.
He hasn't driven this yet, so let's do the thing.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've switched it back over to Sport Plus from Quiet.
Oh, good.
Thus the engine is moving.
Yeah. Not super responsive,
No,
but
the drive button has been pressed. Ooh, paddles actually feel decent.
paddles do feel decent. They're plastic, but the actuation is good. I'm
Okay.
gonna put this in manual mode too.
Okay.
Manual transmission mode.
Yep.
Okay.
Holy shit. Okay. Initial impressions, speed is absolutely hidden from you.
Yes.
Completely.
Yes.
Like, you would never know until you look down at the gauge cluster what speed you're doing. It is scary fast. Like, and scary easy to just go womp and easily.
I'm looking for oh shit handles.
I know, right? There's not really too many options on your side.
No, this one's good though.
Yeah. Because it's just so easy to just. You know, I almost feel that the turbo shove combined with the electric shove is this intoxicating mix.
It's one shove. You don't feel a difference in between the two.
Yeah, because you can feel when I turn like this, you can feel it kind of pull around and pull you through the corner.
Well, and the front wheels do also have vectoring with those motors there. So that's why you saw the difference in between my like track mode version, where it was a little shovey, and then turning around, going back up the hill in Sport Plus mode, and you could feel it's not like a GTI, because GTIs have those have e-diffs.
Yep.
And you can feel it turning on and off with pulling the front wheel, and Veloster is the same way.
Yeah.
This is not like that.
No.
It's just the car in the front of the nose is just tugging in.
Now I'm curious about this. So far, transmission shifts great.
It's on par with PDK.
Yeah, but like. Okay, so it's a little delayed
A
there.
little laggier than an RS, GT3 RS, yeah.
Upshifts are awesome though. Like if you're in it, the upshifts when you're in it. Jesus. H fucking Christ. Like.
Welcome to supercars now, and this isn't even that high up on the rung of supercars.
Oh,
I didn't quite like that.
yep. No. But I actually appreciate what it did there, because it noticed that, oh yeah, that was a little too high, I'll let you know, and then went straight back into the gear below, or the gear above, I mean.
Yeah, and it also flashes at you.
Yeah, so it actually tells you, hey, FYI, that wasn't right.
Listen, dingus.
And so I'm actually glad that it defaults to, I'll let the human do its thing, and if it's just not quite enough, I'll let them know, rather than just saying no.
This is a canyon missile.
It's insane.
It's hard to really, and maybe it's just our pedestrian mindset,
Maybe.
that we haven't driven a lot of cars at this level, right?
No.
But it's hard to also fathom with some of these corners, especially the fast ones, how to be faster. And I guess you can with like Viper ACRs and McLaren 765s. But holy fucking shitballs, Batman.
This brings up an interesting conundrum in my brain. You saw me practically fall in love with the black car.
Yes,
and-
which had manual steering, a manual gearbox,
And just manual feeling everything, even manual throttle, was cable throttle.
cable throttle, and a third of the power.
Yeah.
Non-turbo, no electric motors. The electric motors were in the windows that go up and down.
And in the blower fan.
Yes, yes.
I look at that, and then I look at this, and I'm like, holy shit, this is a totally different experience. Shares the same name, shares a similar ethos as trying to move the brand forward, but so much of this is spooky how fast you have to go to access the true limits. In fact, we've mentioned before on here that modern cars can be a little bit, it is touchy. Like
It is touchy.
Once you heat these
and
brakes
then
up.
if you, so actually, side note, these are carbon ceramic brakes that are an option with the Type S.
And what I was getting at, we mentioned before that what's difficult with modern cars is approaching the limits anywhere except for the traffic. Because even what I just did right there, I can feel that. That was probably 7/10 of the car's limit. I'm not going to push it a damn dime over that. Not even close. Even if it was my car, I'd actually probably be struggling to justify
you'd
that.
probably struggling to justify it even on track.
I know.
The limits are so high, and yes, it does so much for you, which is part of the early Gen R8, the R35 GTR-ness about it. It's, you know, I use those as poster children for sports cars, supercars, whatever you want to call them, cars that practically almost drive themselves.
Yeah.
You know, with how easy they are just to hop in, you know, toss the keys.
You know, I think I would be more inclined to own the older car. Not because of this is bad. This is insanely amazing. Not because that car's better than this car, because by every metric, it's not. And even by some experience standards, when you're just going and pulling paddles like this, there's a certain flavor there that you just can't even get in the older car. They're just completely different sections of the spice rack. Spicy in very different ways. That's a classic old school barbecue heat. This is like any of the brands of death pepper that you eat. Like you're at the limit, you have to be at the limit to experience it, and there's no way to experience it beyond that. But when you're at that limit, it just...
Well, you and I haven't even come close to the limit of this car.
And I'm more talking about my limits.
Yeah,
Let's be clear
we need to make
here.
that very clear. We're not beating our chest and saying how crazy tough and like badass we are. I am literally along for the ride, and you are almost along for the ride too.
I know. And to be fair, it is a damn good experience. I would simply worry about the experience getting a little old, you know?
What is this going to be like in like a year of ownership? You know, this is the owner's fun car. What's this car going to be like after a year? Is this going to get old?
Yeah, I'm sure that this experience like might get old only because it's so exhilarating that like you might run out of the adrenaline because you have to go so fast to do it.
I think we're going to run out of adrenaline after this weekend.
I think we are too. Realistically speaking, like, I think the experience of the older car is a little more timeless. And this is obviously saying this when this car is brand new. Who knows exactly how it'll feel in the long run.
But cars that are less synthetic, cars that are just already good, whether it's in the dynamics, whether it's in the engine note, whether it's the shifter.
Yep.
When a car, like, cars that just are good at their core, like, especially at their OEM phase.
Yep.
Those don't go out of style.
Yeah.
Miatas, E-Type Jags, air-cooled 911s, E30 M3s. We're seeing this in the market too.
Yeah.
People are appreciating cars more and more and more. Something like a hybrid with turbos that makes 600 horsepower and is numbers chasing the 0 to 60 quarter mile stuff. Things that like we're not going to really focus on. We care about more how the car makes us feel.
Yeah.
That has a bigger tendency to go out of style because look at sports cars that came out like 20 years ago. Like hatchbacks can do 0 to 60s that are the same.
Yeah. If you're shooting for a numbers game, which is somewhat a little bit of what this car was shooting for, that will age because bigger and better things will come out, faster things.
Well, remember when the R35 came out in 2008?
And that was mind-blowing.
It was mind-blowing, and it was like one of the first turbo V6 dual-clutch all-wheel drive cars that kind of became a really great setup for track times and 0 to 60s, quarter miles, whatever.
Yeah.
But, like, it's old. It's really old. They're still on the same generation 14 years later.
Which is insane.
I'm not going to say that it's going to age poorly. I just have a question about it.
Same.
I just don't know. And maybe this car might be regarded later as an amazing masterpiece of what the Honda brand and Acura could do in the mid-late 2010s and into the 2020s.
Yeah. Reviews in time and place of the 92, you had a little polarization of like it's either amazing or it's like, a little boring.
I have friends that have driven NSXs at autocross and said it was completely dull.
Yeah.
Which definitely painted an image in my head of, well, I don't know, it wasn't that bad when I first drove it for a little bit in Nevo Loop, and then I drove that yellow car and I fell in love with it. And it might kick 3.2 Carrera from my dream car list.
That's a big kick.
I've been salivating over the 964 for 15 years.
Yeah.
So, I connected with that car. I don't know.
And I've connected with this car on a speed level, and I definitely like.
Yeah, my neck kind of hurts right now, actually.
I know.
Like straight up, I feel it.
So did mine. Yeah, just like you have to really hold yourself. But man,
I mean, where do you feel like this stacks up in the lineage?
I feel like it almost sits in the same place that.
Like, does this actually deserve the NSX title from the cars of before?
I think so, yes, because the goals were the same. To make a car to move the world forward, and to basically, I view it as almost more of a marketing stunt, a really expensive marketing stunt, where they take this, they create all this new technology for it, which they did with the original as well, and then a lot of that eventually trickles down. They use it to move the brand forward. In the early case, they used that car to help Acura America, because that was brand new at the time.
The only cars they had here stateside was the Legend and the very early Integra.
Yeah. And right now, I think Honda and Acura have been in a little bit of a lull spot since like the S2000 went out of style. And
well, that was Honda. If you're looking at Acura in particular, they've made good stuff, but they've been alternatives to cars that are great.
Yes.
They haven't been making a lot of standouts lately. And we haven't dabbled in this field as much yet. Hopefully that changes.
Yeah.
I'd love for that to change. If we're talking about the $180,000 to $200,000 price bracket, you're almost knocking on the door of 992 GT3s before ADM.
Yep.
But when this car came out in 2015, 2016, 991 GT3 was out.
Yep.
I would rather probably own that.
I agree. I think that while this may have more of certain sensations, you could use a GT3 like that.
This is way less emotional than a GT3.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a turbo hybrid, as opposed to a naturally aspirated motor that revs out to 9,000 RPM.
This is effectively the latest and greatest drivable smartphone.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as a diss. There's a lot of goods that come with that.
Yeah, I mean, you just hopped in and just did felonies.
Yeah, you can
easily. Like, you could almost do it blindfolded.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you could put a bunch of cameras on this thing, and being that it already has electric steering and things like that, the car could just drive itself around a track at top speed.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Just about.
Yeah.
But
it's dynamically very competent. The engine does sound good, though, especially high up. There is a song that is sung.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're going to cruise back.
Yes.
I think we'll probably get back to the studio to have a little final discussion on wrap-up.
Okay, that was fast. That is some car.
I mean, you can see in the review, we were almost a little lost for words. It was difficult to kind of punctuate exactly what to think.
Well, that's the interesting thing about taking these two cars that are so much more visceral and require so much of your input and so much more of almost of your attention.
Yep.
I mean, that does require your attention just for the sheer pace that it sets.
Yes.
But as far as sensory input or sensory output and just what you're taking in, even when you're moving at pace, that cuts a lot out from you.
It's probably a good thing considering how fast it moves. It would be pretty damn scary if it truly didn't numb at least some of the sensory experience.
And we chose, your boy chose that road.
Yes.
Because if we put it on anything more tight and twisty, like, I'm not saying we would have gone off, because, like, we know how to drive cars. We know where to draw that line. But at the same time, I don't think it really would have told us much else. So we wouldn't have gotten into the car's, real driving dynamics and experience on a narrower or more winding road. But
it would do the Bugatti thing of erasing straights.
Because it started to already.
Even on that road, which has a lot more straights than the roads we drove these two on. Mm-hmm. And the car would outdrive the road at that point, because they just don't match up. All of a sudden, we're trying to drive a road that with 600 horsepower, if you cut that in half, it would probably be happy. So the road we drove it on with all the straights and stuff, we actually got to access a little bit of that car's potential.
Right.
Now, I mean, especially on a car like this that's this rare and this expensive, we're not going to push it past 7/10. We're going to try to access a limit just enough to where we can actually see what the car does.
But you also almost got a ticket.
Yes, it's so easy and so simple to speed in this thing.
Right.
That even when I was probably driving at 4/10 after coming around a corner and just kind of slowing down for just a moment, off to the right, we see DMR or DNR. And they were talking to some campers and whatnot, and I didn't know that I was doing as fast as I was because the car was so quiet. And, our assistant fell asleep multiple times in these cars. Like, this thing is, Chen, I believe that your description was as quiet as a church, I think?
Or a library.
It had to have been like a library. It was quiet, though.
So, it's quiet as a library. Like, this thing, and all three of these cars have like good seats and are honestly decent to be in, but this thing being a modern car with how just quiet everything is and the fact that part of it's electric, less road noise, just modern technologies and sound deadening, it is just dead silent, even at allegedly triple digits.
It's crazy to think about how different a car can be of just being a product of a different time. If you're looking at like, C8 Corvettes or the new 992 911s, or I'd be curious to see how the Lotus Emira is going to be.
And, I need to give a lot of things in the favor of this. So this did make me really excited for the future because we're in the middle of this big, we'll just call it a revolution for lack of a better term, where we're looking for ways to get out of internal combustion for emissions reasons and just to make better means of transportation, which is great. There's a lot of downsides that come with that, which I mentioned earlier with the black car. We lose a lot of mechanical feeling, and we're getting to the point where the engine is going to be one of those things, because that is a mechanical beast that you control with your foot.
Right.
This did a very good job of melding the capability of being electric, the capability of the engine turning on and off, and the transition between those two was very seamless.
Oh, yeah.
Even starting it up in here to maneuver it to this position, you start it up initially and the engine fires to life and then shuts right down. And you almost feel no NVH. It is super smooth.
On our way back to drop that car off on our film shoot when we were out in the field, we came up on a huge traffic jam in one of the canyon roads, not the narrow stuff, but it was this highway.
Yeah.
And the car went in and out of electric mode, and the only way that you really noticed is that there is a whole other dial that's off to the left where if you're, however much you're in the EV mode and using that power, the needle goes down, and when you get out of that it's regen and then electric mode, and that switches back and forth, but the seamlessness of going into the gas mode, it's seamless like the gearbox or the gear changes are. It's like this, and you don't feel the car lurching. It just is that thing.
And you just hear a slight amount more noise behind you when the V6 fires up. That's really your only indications that something has changed.
Right.
That has made me excited for the future as we're kind of in this transition period, and I hope more things, and I'm sure Acura will take that technology and start to trickle it into other things to help us bridge this gap, and I hope it goes well. Because if it goes any bit as well as that, this transition won't be as bad as I think some people fear it will be. When trying not to lose the dynamics and the mechanical feeling of stuff.
Well, yeah, and even the personality behind vehicles right now, before everything has already gone electrified. The cars have lost personality, and I think that this is a case in point of that. I mean, sure, you can throw intakes and exhausts and burble tunes on cars.
Which, by the way, the owner did throw an exhaust on this afterwards.
It's so filthy, dude. I can't wait to drive that back.
I wish this was how it came from factory. Factory wasn't bad, but this is better.
Well, that's the thing. That was the thing that for those of the 6 people that watched our BMW M2 video, I actually mentioned that in that film.
Yeah.
Where God, I wish this had some crackles, or I wish this had an exhaust on it. And that really shows the start of when cars started to kind of lose a little bit of that personality.
Yeah.
So.
And on top of that, I've already mentioned the comfort. This thing was just fantastic to cruise everywhere in, especially with the dynamic suspension. Seats are amazing. The question really comes down to, as you mentioned before we transitioned into this, does it live up to the legacy? And that's a tough one. They're so different, even though they share the same name and they're both mid-engined.
I have thoughts. I'm curious to hear yours first.
I think number one, and we've discussed this, they both took what was the technology of their time and created the best that Acura could do at the time. And I think they both did that well. As far as whether or not something will age like fine wine, quote unquote.
Got me with the spoon with the cliches.
I know. That's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Because even these cars, only a few years after they came out, if you look at the sales, after the first 4 years, they plummeted because they felt in that time period, only a few years later, kind of dated. And they lasted all the way till 2005.
Right.
And at that point, they felt very dated comparatively. This only lasted for 6 years compared to the, nearly approaching 20-year run of these guys.
Right. Yes.
So not only was the run a lot shorter, so there's not as much for it to drag out and to get old, but also like this took technology that is new right now. Whereas these ones took technology, namely a manual transmission, a naturally aspirated engine, and all that stuff that had already been done for 60 plus years and just made a package that was really good. Mm-hmm. I think it does live up to the legacy, but not necessarily in the way you'd expect, in that it accomplishes what goals it set out to be, which is to bring the Acura brand forward. The CEO of Acura America was quoted as like, we make an NSX when we want to say something.
Yeah.
I would say they said things with this, especially with this Type S. Mm-hmm. I kind of wish that after looking at reviews of the older non-Type S cars, that they would have come out like this. I haven't driven one, so I can't 100% confirm that. But after looking at those reviews and some of the complaints voiced in those reviews versus how I felt driving this, I think if it started with this, I think there wouldn't have been as many people that were like, it's a little dull and quiet and Honda Accord V60 sounding. Mm-hmm. I think it did, and I think it will move the brand forward in their quest to make better cars. I mean, hell, we just had the new new Integra just revealed.
Right.
You only hope that
we've yet to see what else they're going to do with that car. It's just the base Integra, which is a 1.5 turbo, making almost 200 horsepower, basically similar to the Honda Civic Si. We don't know if there's going to be a Type S or a Type R, unless if you guys know anything. Type S or Type R, ITR coming out. Yeah.
Nothing revealed yet.
Yeah, we don't know yet. I'm sure they will. I'm sure there will be a Type S. God knows what that looks like, if they're going to take what's the Civic Type R drivetrain and put that in that. I don't know. But to give my thoughts about if this stacks up, I think that there's a similar byline.
Yeah.
Acura and Honda's mission statement when that came out was to take on Ferrari, namely the 348. And I've not driven a 348. I haven't really driven any mid-engine V8 Ferraris, period.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really strong contender, and I would like to see what that back-to-back with a Ferrari would be like.
Yeah.
I think that this isn't necessarily to take on Ferrari. This is more to take on the modern sports car market, namely probably the R35 GTR, with how it's all-wheel drive, turbo V6, and with a dual clutch. Mm-hmm. It shares a similar recipe. Granted, the engine's in a different place, and the front motor or front wheels are electrified.
Yeah.
It does things differently, but it's still well over 3,500 pounds, and is all-wheel drive with a dual clutch. With that said, I still think it does. I think it does. I mean, they are products of different eras. It's really hard to even compare that to that car.
Almost impossible.
And people might have clicked on this video, might be scratching their heads of like, well, why are you including those cars in there in the first place? They're so different. What's the point?
The point is looking at like when the same company, literally the same company, Acura, Honda's never been bought out, takes the same name and slaps two very different cars on it. That's the only comparison you can really make is, does this live up to the NSX name? Not, does this compare to that?
Right, and I think it does live up to the NSX's name because it's hard to see how that could have been made any differently in 2016.
And try to be like, just like they did with this.
Imagine if they put an NAV6 in the middle of a car in 2016.
I mean, they would be laughed out of the room.
Nobody would have bought it.
They'd be laughed out of the room, and they accomplished, I think, the same goals. At the outset of these, it was to take on Ferrari and build an F1 car for the road. And they spent a lot of time trying to make that perfect.
And they proved it.
Exactly. And the outset of this, while it may not have been to take on Ferrari or make an F1 car for the road, it was to also accomplish the same goals that these ended up accomplishing in proving that Acura and Honda can do astonishing things and bring their brands forward. Hell, these two were paramount in launching the Acura brand. They weren't the first cars launched in the Acura brand, but they were.
Or that car isn't included. It's that one.
Sorry, this car specifically. But they were paramount in trying to make that brand a thing.
And the thing that I also want to mention about this, it can do both ends of the spectrum. It can do the crazy light your hair on fire, even though it doesn't light your hair on fire as much as that car does.
Yep.
It's still like, okay, let's go fast. Let's go and do the thing. We're flying up canyons. We're doing track days. We're punching in front of the light, whatever.
Yeah.
It can do that, and it can also put your co-driver or passenger asleep. Literally.
The old cars did that mechanically and very well.
Yeah, the older cars could definitely calm down. This does it more on the comfort. So if you take like the whole spectrum of the scale,
Yeah.
this side is more of, say, the light your hair on fire, and this side is more of the comfort. The breadth of it is the same in between the two cars, or the two eras of cars. The older cars were more on this side, where it does more of the light your hair on fire, and the newer car is more of the comfort side, but still is also fast.
Because, you know, the engine can shut off, be completely silent, and the suspension can go into bumpy road mode.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. I mean, there you have it. Like, it's not truly possible to compare them. You have a completely mechanical car versus, you know, a car that is driven by computers, but they did a good job of making it feel not as bad as some of its contemporaries. And, you know, if I had to choose one, I do have to say I would probably be choosing the older car. It's not because the new car's bad. It's because that's the generation that I was a child in, and that's the generation I grew up with. That doesn't make this bad. This is still an astonishing piece of engineering, and I can totally see why people have bought them. And especially this Type S being as special as it is.
Look at that color.
With the Type S update, and I know we have difference of opinion on the front end. I know that
I'm on the fence.
You're on the fence,
Yeah.
but I do think overall, front end be damned, they did a very good job of taking the design that was not quite as exciting as maybe it could have been, and really just turning it up just enough. It looks, no doubt, much more striking. In fact, when we were cruising up to this location, we had Gavin in the yellow car and me in the blue car, and we had a minivan in the HOV lane beside us that, like, initially was by Gavin, and he gave him a couple little runs, and he pulled back to this, and the kid would go, oh, and like jaw dropped, and I'm like, okay, 5 gears down, and you know, so this is the one that's probably going to win car shows by a bystander that doesn't know any better, just because of the striking looks and stuff, and it's
Hence
new.
my Michael Bublé reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These cars are perfectly classical, proportionately right, and purpose-built. And they do that recipe so well from a mechanical standpoint. You can't fault either one.
And if, you know, my money being involved, the yellow car just spoke to me, and it really, truly felt like an extension of my personality in the car, with it just being easygoing but fun to drive, but also involving, but meanwhile being rewarding. You're having to work for it, but it's not a pain.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the black car is a pain. The black car is superb to drive.
Yeah.
I just really, or the yellow car just really spoke to me. So.
And the black car to me. So I think if I had to leave with one of the three, I'd leave with that.
And it's all part of the reason why we're on either side of the table.
See?
I want
All planning.
Yes, by design, like these cars.
So with that being said, thank you for watching, and we've got to make a couple quick mentions.
Yes. To those watching, this location might look somewhat familiar. The sign in the back might look familiar. We were here with a couple of old Mini Coopers last year. Thank you, and a massive shout out to Derek and the good folks at Makes and Models for making this happen kind of last second.
We did this shoot initially, and we had some camera issues because that's what you get in the film world.
And that happened at a different location. And we were, while trying to make that location work, we decided to, you know, hit up Makes and Models as a plan B. And they have been nothing but supportive of us and the things that we're trying to do, and just honestly trying to make a home for us here, just super last second. So Derek, Makes and Models, y'all are the people. Derek, you're the man. And yeah, thanks for having us, truly.
Seriously. And to you, the viewer, thanks for watching. Let us know what you thought down in the comments below.
Hey, buy our shirts. We have shirts, we have hats, we have stickers.
We're gonna shill a little bit, not because we think we're cool enough to shill for merch, but because of the way we do content. This is the best way we can make money.
It's not making money for making money purposes. I mean, sure, it'd be cool to make this a career of ours, but it's the way that we can kind of keep this thing going. So if you feel like buying some merch, or even if you want to read some articles of ours, if you want to check out our podcast, we have a podcast as well. www.exhibitionofspeed.com is the best way to find that. Link in bio, link in the subscription, link in the
subscribe as well, but not link in the subscription.
Link in the description below. Words is tough.
And as far as the merch goes, we have hats, shirts, and stickers. And if you just want to buy a sticker, we won't complain.
And I'm actually, when this video goes live, I will have started working on designs for hoodies because fall and winter is a coming. Boyfriend hoodie season is a coming. So get yourself one when that happens. We'll let you know when that drops.
But thank you all for watching. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.